Welcome to the Process Breakdown Podcast, where we talk about streamlining and scaling operations of your company, getting rid of bottlenecks, and giving your employees all the information they need to be successful at their jobs. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, host of the Process Breakdown Podcast, where we talk about streamlining and scaling operations of your company, getting rid of bottlenecks, and giving your staff everything they need to be successful at their job. And I'm excited today because I've got David Finkel, who's the CEO of Maui Mastermind, one of the world's premier business coaching companies, got thousands of clients worldwide. He's also a Wall Street Journal bestselling author of 11 books, including Scale, which was co-authored with the co-founder of Priceline, Jeff Hoffman. Also, The Freedom Formula, his most recent book, How to Succeed in Business Without Sacrificing Your Family, Health, or Life. And his syndicated articles, business articles, can be seen on Inc.com, FastCompany.com, Forbes.com, and have garnered millions of readers. His work has also been featured in several prestigious media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Business Week, Fox Business, MSNBC, Inc. magazine. He's helped hundreds of thousands of business leaders to grow their companies and get their lives back. He lives in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with his wife and 3 sons. And before we get into this episode is brought to you by Sweet Process. Have you had team members ask you the same questions over and over again, and it is like the 10th time you spend explaining it, and you want to club yourself over the head? Well, the solution is a tool called Sweet Process. It's a software that makes it drop-dead easy to train and onboard new staff and save time with existing staff. Not only do universities, banks, hospitals, and software companies use them, but also first responder government agencies use them in life or death situations to run their operations. You can use Sweet Process to document all your repetitive tasks that eat up your precious time so you can focus on growing your team and empowering them to do their best work, which is a topic that we're going to be talking about today in this interview. So you can sign up for a free 14-day trial, no credit card required. Go to sweetprocess.com, sweet like candy, sweet, SWEET, process.com. All right, David, so I'm excited to talk to you all about scaling up businesses, increasing your own personal freedom, your own business freedom. You've got a lot of different concepts and principles around this. But first, now you've got a long career in entrepreneurship. Were you the kind of kid who was out there knocking on doors, selling chocolate bars in your entire neighborhood, or setting up lemonade stands on the weekends? Or are you one of these who fell into entrepreneurship once you reached adulthood?
I would be one of those young entrepreneurs. No, I found a better way to sell candy than door to door. I snuck it into school and sold it in elementary school. I'd buy a pack of Now and Laters, which is the candy of hot flavor back then, and
that's a good one.
Buy it for 10 cents and then sell each individual piece for a nickel. And that would be about 45 cents, if I remember correctly, when I sold the whole amount. Pretty good markup, decent gross profit margin. But yeah, I've been an entrepreneur probably most of my life.
Wow. And what were some of your early business endeavors when you started to reach adulthood, or were you, in high school starting your own businesses?
Yeah, I mean, my first real serious business, I flopped. It was a nutritional company that was wholesaling vitamins and minerals, and I didn't know what I was doing. Wonderful learning experience, 21 years old, dropped out of college, told my family I'm starting this company. Everyone told me how crazy I was. You're nuts, you're an idiot. My parents were befuddled, shaking their head. And they were right. I mean, 10 months later, I was out of business. I learned all kinds of good stuff. I subleased office space. Never occurred to me that I could pay my rent, but the person who was on the lease wasn't paying her rent. And as a result, when she got evicted, so did I. And lots of wonderful lessons like that. And thereafter, I started other companies that were quite successful. And I've sold several companies and started others that I still own. I've had a few more flops, but most of them have worked out pretty well.
Now, you took away a lot of lessons from that. You also were really involved in sports when you were younger. You were an ex-Olympic level athlete.
Yeah.
Now, talk a little bit about what you learned from sports and what that experience was like.
Yeah, I mean, I played on the U.S. national field hockey team for about almost 10 years, eight and a half years. I captained the team for a period of time, and then I got hurt before the 96 Olympics. In 1995, I ended up having surgery on my hip. And I had a tumor in my hip that was pressing on a nerve, which kept me out of the Olympics. The best thing I think I would have learned from sports, that the unhealthy thing I learned was that competitive drive, which I put straight into business because it was hard for me to feel empty without sports. So I put it right to business. The healthy thing I learned was a real respect for process. I found for me, as long as I'm making progress towards something that matters, and I can chart that progress visually in sports. Did I do my workout today? Great. How many sprints did I run? How many hours of training sessions did I do this week? If I could visually see that and I would tick it off on these visual charts I'd have on the wall, it was really helpful. A lot of my sport career was spent away from my team. In the US, for us to get better, we had to go overseas and play for club teams. And so I would, in many respects, be responsible for my own training. And that still carries with me today. If you could see in my office, in the back corner, I have a blackboard over there where I have different categories in my business and in my personal life. I'm a little bit anal retentive about that, where when I do certain things in certain categories, I give myself a little tick mark. And at the end of the week, it makes me feel the progress that I've made. And that really, I find, is very self-motivating to be clean on the process of how I go about growing my company.
It's a brilliant idea. And you like the old school. So this isn't software. This is an old school. It's a board on the wall.
Visceral. I love the feel. And I like to be able to look at it. Now, could I put it up on a computer and I have a screen over there, a big screen? Yeah, I could. I like the tangible concreteness. Now, I'm about to turn 50 this year, so maybe there's a little bit
Happy
to do
birthday.
with that. Thank you. But I still there's something about writing it, that little tick mark, that little mark just gives me a little shot of dopamine. I like it.
Yeah. Now, you are an expert in scaling up businesses. And so let's talk a little bit about that. First, let's start with mistakes. What's one of the bigger or the biggest mistake that you see when it comes to either companies or at the department level within a company or a team when they're struggling to scale up? What do you often see?
It's a great question. And I was writing about this in my recent book, Freedom Formula. One of the things we talked about, whether you're the head of a department, the COO of a company, or you run the whole show, there's a medical condition that really stops people from scaling and growing something beyond themselves. It's called control-itis. It's the inflammation of their control gland. And all kidding aside, let's face it, most of us as ambitious business people, we hold on way too tightly. I'll speak for myself. I've had experiences where I've handed off, and because it didn't go well, the lesson I learned from that, improperly likely, was I need to hold on tight. If you want something done right, do it yourself. And that's the wrong lesson. What I should be learning, and this has probably been something in the last 10 years that for me has been very clear in my business career, where it wasn't in the first 15 years, where I was very controlling, how much of my problems with handing off to other people wasn't that they failed or made a mistake. I was just not a very good leader. I wasn't a great manager. I didn't hand it off. I didn't shrink the units of accountability. I didn't take into account what was the capability level of the person I was handing off to relative to this project, task, or responsibility. And so I have to ask the question, am I the issue? And if I hold on too tightly, by definition, I am constraining the growth of my team or my company, and I'm the big bottleneck there. I've got to be willing to get over that psychological hurdle of letting go of control intelligently, not just abdicating, but intelligently, incrementally, and structurally handing over bit by bit to other people for functional areas of responsibility, not just for me to say, do this task, do that task, but handing over functional areas of responsibility.
Now, one of the struggles that businesses have is the idea of what to focus on. And there's this principle, the Pareto principle, which has been popular, also known as the 80-20 principle. First, explain for everyone listening what that is, what it means to you, and then how business owners should be applying it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So for years, I subscribed to this idea of this 80-20 rule. 80% of what I do is very low value. It delivers only 20% of my result. And 20% of my activities generate a leverage result and create 80% of the result. And that's called Pareto's principle, Italian economist of the 1800s. Let's take that to the most productive extreme. And this is something that for me, when I look at the best entrepreneurs, the best C-suite executives, they really get this. So if 80% of what I do gives me 20% of the result, let's call that D time. By definition, it's low value. C time is that 20% that gives me the 80% of the result. Think about that. 4 times less input generates 4 times more output. That means every 1 hour of C time is 16 times more valuable than an hour of D activities. And the math isn't exact, but I think as a place, we can take that to its extreme. Well, if 20% of what I do gives me 80% of the result, then 20% of the 20% gives me 80% of the 80%. And so that 4% sweet spot, which we call in my company B time, gives me 64% of the output. That's amazing. 1 hour of B time is 64 times more valuable than an hour of D time. And if I do it one more math moment here, 20% of the 20% of the 20% gives me 80% of the 80% of the 80%. And here's what the math, there's that magic 1%. Technically, it would be 0.8%, but we'll call it 1%, gives me half the result. And again, I don't think it's exact, but I think it shows the relative magnitudes. You know, I can spend 20 hours on my, like for example, earlier today, I was doing a webinar for my clients. We were working with maybe about 70 or so, 80 of our clients. And I did a quick survey. How many hours per week on average were they spent doing email? The answer is the lowest person was 2 to 3 hours, but the median was somewhere between 7 and 8 hours, and the highest was 25 hours per week. Even at 7 to 8 hours, that's one full working day, 20% of a typical work week doing email. Most email is D activities, possibly some is C activities, low value. That's very different. I can spend 10 hours in my inbox and not get as much done as 1 hour of a key client conversation or a strategic decision I make about pricing. For example, one law firm that we worked with, they changed their pricing model for their paralegal staff. They priced their partners and senior partners quite aggressively, their associate quite aggressively per hour, but their paralegals, they were well below the market norm. They ended up increasing their bottom line firm profit by over $500,000 simply by going from 125 to 150 or 125 to 175 an hour for their equivalent of their mid-level staff that were paralegals and legal secretaries. Huge deal. It took them probably 4 hours to make the decision, gather enough facts, change it in the billing system. 4 hours to make $500,000. That's a time. And most people don't think that way. They focus on the C and the D level activities, but we need finer distinctions around how value is created. And so what I would tell anyone that's listening to this podcast, please write down on paper, what are your A and B level activities? Maybe you don't know which is which. Maybe it's blurry right now, but what are the things that you do that create the most value for your company? And what do you do that creates the least value? Later on, maybe we'll talk about it, but I rob from D time. I diminish, delete, defer, or design out, the 4 Ds, as many of those D level activities as I can so that I get more A and B level time in my work week.
And I imagine you're also trying to find stuff that gives you energy as well. But then again, if it's revenue producing, it probably creates energy. But it's interesting because for the law firm, if you ask them, they probably would have said that billing client time would be the A level time.
Isn't that crazy? It's almost never their highest value use, but they don't think about that ever.
Yeah.
They don't ever think about that. You know,
Right.
Bringing in a new client, creating a new referral partner, billing strategies, creating a good hire for bringing in another legal, creating a system whereby your associate attorneys and paralegals have better quality control when they deliver legal work that they're doing. All these are things that make a firm a lot more money than just me doing billable work. Even if I'm charging $800 an hour, it's still very linear time. A and B, I get magnitudes of return. C time, I get a good, healthy, linear return. And D time, I get a diminished return. I get less than linear.
Yeah. Now let's talk about systems.
Please.
Because you're not a fan of systems that just get written down on a piece of paper, stuffed in a drawer somewhere, and no one follows them. But you have this concept of UBS, which stands for Ultimate Business Systems. So talk a little bit about that and how that is something that will actually get used.
Yeah. 22 years ago, I was building a company with a partner, and we made a decision. We said, we're going to build this business so that it could be independent of us. We're going to build this business as if we could sell it. And then we were going to make the decision every year, do we want to buy it or not ourselves? And if we didn't, we're going to sell it. And if we did, we're still enjoying it, fulfilled by it, feel good about it, we keep it. Well, we started coming up with all these different systems to create the company. And we were loving acronyms. So the acronym for a business system is not really good. So we took the word ultimate and put it in front of B and S.
I just got that. It took me a second, by the way.
No problem. So that's where the UBS came from. And I've been doing it for over two decades now. And so here's the thing. Most companies that create systems, they're created from on high, or somebody separate to the company leaves their department for a day, a week, a month, creates this big system and comes back like on high. like Moses from Mount Sinai, shaha, like, and delivers these stone tablets of this policies and procedures manual. And then they wonder why, number one, no one wants to do it. There's resistance. Number two, the more resistance, the less it's used, the more it becomes out of date very quickly, which means more resistance to using it, and pretty soon it's a downward spiral. So the UBS is a framework by which you create the system for how you're going to create, store, edit, refine, cross-train, and when need be, delete systems. So one easy way to think about it would be as a cloud-based system of hierarchy of folders, on a Dropbox or a company server. And for example, let's say we have 1.0 sales, 2.0 marketing, 3.0 operations, 4.0 finance, 5.0 team. So I start off by just creating this hierarchy of folders, and I pick one area to start with. For example, I was working with a medical group just earlier this week. They do 20 medical clinics in Texas. They do orthopedic work. And so they started, and they chose to do their clinical is the place that they're starting. One of their folders was for clinical at the clinic level, and they're starting to work on the process of front desk, how they do a patient intake, all the way through to providing their orthopedic services. Great. So we start off by organizing what do we already have of the systems, what are good, and the junk stuff we get rid of. And then each month, each quarter, I add one more new system to that. Here's the thing I would really say, John, when it comes to systems cannot be driven by an individual. The only way systems are real is they become part of the culture that in our company, we create, we use, we store, we correctly name, we put back, we cross-train on systems. That's just part of how we do it. And the only way to do that is 1,000 taps, not one great big fell swoop of the hammer. I can't leave for a month, come back and deliver all my systems. I've got to do it bit by bit, because not only am I maturing the systems, but I've got to mature my staff to have a voice and a sense of commitment to those systems as we go. And if I don't do that along the way, the systems are dead, and I've just wasted resources. It's worse than not even having them.
That's interesting philosophy. So then the final question I want to ask you about is, how do you leverage better design in the creation of all your processes, all your procedures, all your systems? How do you really operationalize your workflow?
Sure. So let's take an example. Let's imagine you're running a service business, and let's say you're a $42 million a year company. So you're a good-sized small business, not quite there as a mid-cap company yet, but you're doing well. And in this business, you have a certain process by which you deliver your service offering. So now, leveraging better design, what we're doing there is we're going back and looking at the process and finding ways to make it faster, cheaper, higher quality, greater value, more consistent. By doing that, what happens is, bit by bit, I'm optimizing it. So I start with a process, and it's really quite straightforward. I just need to chart it out in some way. Some people will put it linear, step 1, step 2, step 3. I find if I want to optimize, I'm better getting a great big whiteboard or a big poster board, and I'm going to lay it out as a flow, boxes and arrows. And I get the steps there, and I ask myself questions like, how could I reduce the number of steps and still get the same or greater value? How could I combine steps? Is there any step that's missing that I could add? Can I automate some of these steps? Can I template some of these steps? Can I reduce the number of linkages? Anytime I have 2 or more people in a flow of a process, especially across functional areas, sales to finance, finance to operations, those are called critical linkages. And the more critical linkages, just like in a relay race, it's a point failure. Anytime I have to hand the baton from one person to the next, especially across functional areas, the odds of me doing it successfully decline. I'm going to drop that sometimes. So the more I can reduce the number of handoffs, or at the very least, can I reinforce those critical linkages in the design? And so let's give a couple of examples. Oh gosh, my company, we're complaining about how sometimes our new clients don't understand, they have the same 10 questions over and over again. Okay, so I can design the process to answer those 10 questions after they come up. I can script out so that my project coordinators know how to answer all 10 of those questions. I can role play it. I can quality control their phone calls to make sure they're answering it the company way. That's pretty poor design. Better design says if something happens again and again, how do I design it out? Can I make the sales process part educational so that that doesn't come up? Can I incorporate an automated sequence of steps that includes some videos that go to educate my clients? If I have, like, for example, one of the people we work with, every new client that they go to their consulting company starts off with a pre-client engagement questionnaire. And it's intimidating. It's like 50, 60 questions. It probably takes 2 or 3 hours for their client to answer. And that was their trigger for when they set up their first intake conversation. That's a pretty poor design. Half the people who they had purchased their service would have a delay of over 3 to 4 weeks before they finish that audit document. Bad design. I'm going to have ticked off people who paid money to my company. I shouldn't do that. Instead, the design might be, okay, I give them the audit document, but if they're not going to respond within 7 days, 9 days, I go ahead and set the first session, and I make the first section where I take those questions right there, a limited amount of them, and I do it right there with them. Or, again, I'm going to design things better so that the things in the past that were manual or variable, I can design them out. I can make higher value. Maybe, for example, one of the financial service companies that we coach, they've just recently shifted to have all their clients be virtual, of course, with all the remain in place orders that are going on right now. Well, they have 17 clients that are really high-end clients that are older that don't do virtual. They just don't know how to do the technology. So we suggested, well, buy them an iPad, preset it up, only have one thing on there, Zoom for the meetings, and have everything set up with an instructional video. So there's only 2 things on the desktop, Zoom and the instructional video. That is it. You think about it. It cost them probably $1,000, maybe $1,200 to buy and set those up and send them.
But it's going to save them losing a client. Yeah.
$250,000 to $500,000 clients. No brainer. Yeah. That was them adding something that created a lot of extra value. And I'll just mention one more thing on the
And it's a wow factor too. Even if someone's, older, maybe they tell their kid about it or something and the kid is blown away, their children.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple to delight a client. I'm curious, John, you've been doing business for a long time. Have you ever had the situation where you created a phantom deliverable where you think you promised something or your client thinks you promised something, but it's low value, but you get stuck doing it anyways? Right? Scope creep, it kills your margins. So I have to be careful in process design for the expectations of a customer or client as well.
Right. You have to be careful with those expectations. That's a big piece. Well, David, this has been wonderful. We've been talking with David Finkel, CEO of Maui Mastermind, author of The Freedom Formula, How to Succeed in Business Without Sacrificing Your Family, Health, or Life. And you can also go check him out at freedomtoolkit.com, right? And mauimastermind.com as well. Where else can people connect with you or learn more about you, David?
Yeah, freedomtoolkit.com would be great. Any bookstore that they're in, they can find one of our books, The Freedom Formula for sure. Amazon nowadays would be probably the easier place since no one's going into a bookstore right now.
Right.
Or barnesandnoble.com or Indigo books right now. But any of those places would be great.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, David.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks for listening to the Process Breakdown Podcast. Before you go, quick question. Do you want a tool that makes it easy to document processes, procedures, and/or policies for your company so that your employees have all the information they need to be successful at their job? If yes, sign up for a free 14-day trial of Suite Process. No credit card is required to sign up. Go to sweetprocess.com, sweet like candy, and process like process.com. Go now to sweetprocess.com and sign up for your risk-free 14-day trial.